As I live, saith the Lord God, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but that the wicked turn from his way and live. Turn ye from your evil ways, for why will ye die?
I was raised without religion. One side of the family, long ago, Catholic, I think. The other side, Jewish. I've never been in a synagogue. I don't believe in a higher power. I'm instinctively hostile to any kind of devotion. Certainty is my enemy. You know, I'm all about doubt, questioning oneself and the nature of reality constantly.
Tears stream down Rose McGowan's face as she speaks out about the shocking suicide of her friend Anthony Bourdain. The 61-year-old host of CNN's Parts Unknown hanged himself just 3 days after designer Kate Spade took her life in the same manner.
The world will not be better off without you. Anthony, why?
From an atheist perspective, why not? Why shouldn't people kill themselves? Robin Williams told us in Dead Poets Society that we and all we do are nothing more than food for the worms, so we should seize the day. But what should we do when the day is no longer worth seizing? When instead of light, it only offers darkness? What should we do when friends and lovers disappoint? When career and fame can no longer fill the emptiness within us? What do we do when we can no longer busy ourselves enough to ignore our own overwhelming despair? Atheism can offer drugs and distractions, but no real purpose for going on.
The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference.
We are natural organisms in a natural environment, and that's all we are, and that's good enough for me. I don't feel bad knowing that. I don't feel like my life is missing something because there's not some transcendent order to it all. There is no purpose of life. In the cosmic picture, the total cosmic picture, we don't matter any more than broccoli matters.
The good news of atheism, the gospel of atheism, is essentially nothing. That nothing happens after death. There's nothing to worry about, there's nothing to fear. When after you die, you are returned to that nothingness that you were before you were born.
When logic fails them, atheists often turn to mockery.
If God does not exist, what then is the purpose of life?
Well, I can only answer for myself. What cheers me up? I suppose mainly gloating over the misfortunes of other people. I guess that has to be it. I think, yeah, mainly crowing over the miseries of others. It doesn't always work, but it never completely fails. And then there's irony. There's irony, and which is the gin in the Campari, you know, the cream in the coffee. Sex can have diminishing returns, but it's amazing. No, that's pretty much it, and then it's a clear run to the grave.
Do you realize that right this second, right now, somewhere around the world, some guy is getting ready to kill himself? Isn't that great? Isn't that great? That's probably the most interesting thing you can do with your life. End it.
Carlin could joke about suicide because he said we are nothing more than a collection of atoms, beings with no soul, no past, and no future. Biochemical organisms really only worthy of contempt. He said in his book Brain Droppings, I have more sympathy for an injured or dead animal than I do for an injured or dead human being, because human beings participate and cooperate in their own undoing. Animals are completely innocent. There are no innocent human beings. Here is an anecdote from the writer Patricia Highsmith. Not so long ago, I said to a friend of mine, if I saw a kitten and a little human baby sitting on the curb starving, I would feed the kitten first if nobody was looking. My friend said I would feed the kitten first if somebody was looking. I would too, Patricia. Atheists alternate between seeing humans as meaningless and godlike. The God of the Bible presents a radically different perspective to both.
I call heaven and earth to record this day against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore choose life, that both thou and thy seed may live, that thou mayest love the Lord thy God, and that thou mayest obey his voice, and that thou mayest cleave unto him. For he is thy life and the length of thy days.
We are material beings, and as Carlin says, we participate in our own undoing. But we also have souls. God created Adam from the dust of the ground, and he breathed into him the breath of life. We are unique from all the other creatures, being made in the very image of God. This image is not material, but spiritual. We are rational, personal beings, made to have fellowship with our Creator. It is this image that explains our genius. We make music and create art. We explore. We long to understand the world around us and to understand ourselves. Christians cannot joke about suicide because we understand it as a profound tragedy. It is bad enough that people make idols of sex, possessions, and fame. But when they realize that these things can never truly satisfy, they throw away their lives, rather than turn to the God who is supposed to be our life. Suicide is not simply the reorganization of atoms, but the destruction of something beautiful. George Carlin may laugh at suicide, but we weep. For all their pretenses, atheists can provide no truth, no value, and no real purpose apart from the God of the Bible. Yet they say Christians are the ones deceived, that these ideas of a God and a soul are nothing more than illusions. They call us to give up our comforting lies and face the hard truth that there is no God. But what is the illusion, and what is real? Atheists argue that if a housewife thinks she sees the Virgin Mary in a grilled cheese sandwich, all claims to the supernatural must be the same. People see what they want to see. Few are better at understanding how we can be fooled than the professional illusionist, James Randi.
Good evening. My name is the Great Randall. I'm a liar, a cheat, and a charlatan. I will blatantly lie to you, but for purposes of entertainment only, of course. And those lies may not be discernible from the truth.
Randi's experience in show business helped him to recognize that some illusionists were fooling people for purposes other than entertainment. This led to him challenging the claims of reputed psychic Uri Geller. He demonstrated that what Geller was doing was simple sleight of hand. To his surprise, many researchers didn't care that he could replicate all that Geller had done. They were professors at Stanford and other leading universities. They had PhDs and were experts in their fields. They wrapped themselves in the mantle of science and reason and convinced themselves they had not been tricked. So Randi enlisted two teenage illusionists. They pretended to have psychic abilities and thoroughly convinced the researchers of their powers before revealing the deception. For all the experts' claims of rationality, they were actually fooling themselves into believing what they wanted to believe. Having exposed Geller and the gullibility of scientists, Randi then turned his attention to faith healers, particularly Peter Popoff. He revealed that what were supposed to be revelations from God were actually coming from Popoff's wife through a radio earpiece.
In the name of Jesus.
Jody Dean. Jody Dean.
Is it Jody? Jody? Dean? Jody Dean?
No, she should be right there on your right side.
Here it comes.
Okay, she lives at 4267 Masterson.
4267 Masterson. I can see the angels of God all around your house. Rosa?
Come here.
Is it Camille? You've been taking a lot of medication?
She's there with her son, Kipper, and he has a lump in his chest.
Wait just a minute. Who's Kipper? He's got a lump in his chest. You want God to melt it right now? Kipper, stand up. God's going to burn that thing out right now.
Randy argues that such frauds are representative of all claims of the supernatural, and that because he has revealed others' lies, we should trust him. Along with Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, and Christopher Hitchens, Randy is one of the champions of the new atheism. He and Dawkins have even started calling themselves brights.
A bright is someone who thinks logically and rationally, bases his or her decisions upon rationality, upon logic, and upon evidence. That's the major thing right there. And if we don't have evidence, we can express our belief or lack of belief in it, but it has to be provisional. I believe that this is probably true, though I don't have any evidence for or against it. It's a perfectly safe statement. And so Brights base all of their decisions and their beliefs on logic, rationality, and on evidence. That's the thing in which they differ from the average person who takes anything that comes along that looks attractive. Oh, I like that. I think I'll believe in it.
Based on such supposed enlightenment, Randy not only rejects Jesus as the Son of God, but he claims that Jesus never even existed.
There are well-accepted accounts from the Bible that Christians and others never question. Events and locations that are part of the story told of Christ and his history. One such is the account in John 1 of the birth of Christ in the lower Galilee town of Nazareth. But Nazareth may be overrated as an historical site that proves the inerrancy of the Bible. Author René Salm has written The Myth of Nazareth, the Invented Town of Jesus, a book that effectively demonstrates the controversial archaeology of the town where the Bible has Jesus Christ being born. The facts are that no demonstrable evidence dating either to the time of Jesus or to earlier Hellenistic times has been found at Nazareth. It is a late Roman Byzantine village, not a mythical settlement at the turn of the era. As author Psalm says, that question has already been answered, and answered convincingly. St. Luke, and thus the inerrant Bible, was plainly, demonstrably dead wrong. Shall we also question the rest of the Holy Bible? Yes, I think so.
Atheists praise Randy's conclusions and mock Christians as ignorant rubes. One comment on his video describes the typical Christian.
If there are no facts to back up your claims, just make it up. The sheep will believe anything they are told.
The funny thing is that it's Randy who's making things up, and it's the atheists who are believing anything they're told. John's Gospel never says that Jesus was born in Nazareth, but simply that he lived there. The Bible is very clear that Jesus was born in Bethlehem, 80 miles away. Besides misrepresenting the Bible, Randy also misrepresents the archaeological evidence, even according to his fellow atheist, Bart Ehrman.
The first argument that I find completely unconvincing, that some of you have heard and maybe have found convincing, is the idea that Jesus of Nazareth could not have existed because Nazareth did not exist. There was no Nazareth. I simply have never found this argument to be anywhere close to persuasive for two reasons. One reason is archaeologists have dug where ancient Nazareth was, and they've discovered that it was there. This is not a debated point among Palestinian archaeologists, several of which are good friends of mine. They don't debate whether Nazareth existed because they have dug it and they found it. They've uncovered a house there, they've uncovered a farm there, they've uncovered pottery there, they've uncovered coins there. The pottery and the coins date to the days of Jesus. Certainly, Nazareth did exist. It's been shown to exist. Anyone who thinks otherwise simply doesn't know the archaeological record. I'm afraid it's that simple.
Remember, Randy claimed his position had been proven
convincingly,
but it hadn't. Like the scientists who supported Geller, Randy wraps himself in the mantle of science and reason, but he fools himself into seeing what he wants to see. Such self-delusion is not incidental to atheism. It underlies all of atheism. In the same way that illusionists use sleight of hand, atheists use appeals to science. They pretend that it is the antithesis of faith and the only reliable source of knowing truth. If we accept their assertion, then God and the soul are dismissed by definition, because the scientific method is incapable of dealing with anything other than matter in motion. But such claims are absurd, because logic, math, and even the scientific method itself are also immaterial. Atheists insist that without scientific proof, it is a delusion to believe that anything could be more than opinion. But by that standard, their confidence in science is also a delusion, because science cannot prove the immaterial principles on which it is based. Pioneers in the scientific revolution were not left to such absurdities. Scientists like Isaac Newton and Johannes Kepler believed that we could have true knowledge because the God who made all things knows all things and has given us truth. He has revealed himself to be a reasonable God who made a reasonable universe. He invites us as his creatures to reason with him.
This most beautiful system of the sun, planets, and comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent being. Atheism is so senseless and odious to mankind that it never had many professors.
Those laws of nature are within the grasp of the human mind. God wanted us to recognize them by creating us after his own image so that we could share in his own thoughts.
Because of their confidence that a reasonable God controls the universe, these scientists believe the principle of induction allowed them to experiment and to draw accurate conclusions from their observations. Isaac Newton observed that for every action there was an equal and opposite reaction. He concluded this was the way God typically made nature to behave, and since God is reasonable, we should expect the same to apply in the future as a law of motion. Though the scientific revolution largely flowed out of the Protestant Reformation, it's no surprise to Christians that non-Christians can also do science, because we are all made in the image of God and we live in his universe. The problem for non-Christians is that when they suppress their knowledge of God, they lose any basis for expecting induction to work. Polytheism sees the universe as under the control of competing, unpredictable gods, while pantheism sees the universe under the control of an impersonal force. Neither gives real confidence that what happens today will in any way resemble what happens tomorrow. Both tend to view history as cyclical rather than linear, and both discourage experimentation in favor of contemplation. Aristotle could write brilliant works on logic, but also argue that things that weighed twice as much fell twice as fast. China discovered many things before the Christian West, but their worldview did not give them confidence in a rational framework into which to fit these discoveries. As late as 1922, the Chinese philosopher Yu Lunfang wrote,
China has not discovered the scientific method because Chinese thought started from mind, and from one's own mind.
Rather than seeing the scientific revolution as evidence for the God of the Bible, atheists assume they can appropriate the scientific method, but jettison the God on whose existence the method is based. Their problem is that apart from the God of the Bible, they have no logical basis for trusting induction. The very idea that there are laws in nature only became popular after the year 1600. It was based on the assumption that the God of the Bible was the lawgiver. Without that God, there are no scientific laws, simply patterns of observed behavior. Those patterns may or may not be indicative of the past or the future. Atheists insist that the scientific method keeps producing positive results, even when God is rejected. But remember, they are making claims for science far beyond it being useful. They are insisting that it is self-attesting and renders faith irrational. Older atheists were not so bold. The philosopher Bertrand Russell admitted,
"All arguments which, on the basis of experience, argue as to the future or the unexperienced parts of the past or present, assume the inductive principle. Hence, we can never use experience to prove the inductive principle without begging the question. Thus, we must either accept the inductive principle on the grounds of its intrinsic evidence or forego all justification of our expectations about the future. If the principle is unsound, we have no reason to expect the sun to rise tomorrow, to expect bread to be more nourishing than a stone, or to expect that if we throw ourselves off the roof, we shall fall."
Do you understand the problem? Atheists either argue in a circle, or they have to give up on induction. They call faith evil and the antithesis of science, but they either have to accept on faith that the inductive principle is true, or they have to give up any hope of knowledge. They have to accept on faith that even without comprehensive knowledge, they can draw valid conclusions from their experiments. They then have to accept on faith that these observations not only give them truth about the nature of reality, but also prescriptions for how we are to lead our lives. When pressed with all the faith their system requires, some atheists will admit that they can't know anything with real certainty.
I can live with doubt and uncertainty and not knowing. I think it's much more interesting to live not knowing than to have answers which might be wrong. I have approximate answers and possible beliefs and different degrees of certainty about different things, but I'm not absolutely sure of anything, and then many things I don't know anything about.
From the standpoint of objective reality, the belief that there is a God is a delusion.
Do you still believe that?
Yes.
How do you know anything to be objectively real?
How do I know? What do you mean by know?
Well, the thing is, you made the claim that according to objective reality, belief in God is a delusion.
Yes, I'm stating what my belief is
Right.
about reality.
But you said according to objective reality.
Yes, I believe it's objective.
Okay, so how do you know anything to be objectively real when you've admitted you could be a brain in a vat?
What do you mean by know? Do you mean how am I aware of?
Right, how are you aware of objective reality?
I'm aware of reality through my senses.
Okay, how about this? Why don't you tell me one thing you know?
Why?
Because that's my question, sir.
Well, what do you mean by know?
Justified true belief.
I'm not claiming to know.
Anything.
What do I consider as justified true belief? I believe that, well, in that context, justified true belief, are we using my definition of true or yours?
Yours. What do you know to be true? What do you know that
I'm
corresponds?
not omniscient in that context.
Do you know that corresponds with absolute reality? Do you know that?
No.
Okay, well, that's fine. I asked him one thing, and he doesn't even know the one thing he claims to know.
What?
That's the problem. That's a problem.
Sorry.
Unfortunately, few atheists are consistent with such uncertainty. They presume they can assign probabilities in a world in which they know nothing for certain. And rather than admit their foolishness, some even dismiss philosophy rather than reconsider their certainty of atheism.
Philosophy is dead. Philosophers have not kept up with modern developments in science, particularly physics. Scientists have become the bearers of the torch of discovery in our quest for knowledge.
Hawking's specialty was theoretical cosmology, baby universes, a unified theory of everything, and higher dimensions sell books. But they are all pure conjecture.
M-theory doesn't disprove God, but it makes him unnecessary. It predicts that the universe will be spontaneously created out of nothing, without the need for a creator.
Atheists tell us that it's ridiculous to believe that the God who made the universe could make a snake to speak. But what is their alternative? A universe that creates itself from nothing. Where is their empirical evidence? How does nothing produce anything, much less human consciousness? We're not supposed to ask such questions. There's a reason that in spite of all the hype, Hawking never won the Nobel Prize. He did real science in the 1970s, but much of what he promoted later in life was science fiction in the cause of what he wanted to be true. He was championed because it was what a lot of others wanted to be true as well. Most atheists never think through the absurdity of their position. They embrace unbelief because they desperately want it to be true and convince themselves of a narrative that allows them to sneer at Christians.
The more science progresses, the less need it has of God.
Atheists tell us that primitive peoples assumed that gods must be behind the phenomena they could not understand. But now science is providing naturalistic explanations. Since we understand nuclear fusion, we supposedly don't need a god to create the sun. They assure us that science is filling in all the gaps in our knowledge and will soon make belief in God unnecessary. But once again, all of this is absurd. They are assuming that God must cause something without means or else have nothing to do with it. Imagine a car moving down a road. Someone who had never seen a car might assume it was being moved by magic. Science can provide a naturalistic explanation for the car's movement. A transmission that is unseen is moving the wheels. Science can push deeper and show that the transmission is being moved by an engine and even describe the internal workings of that engine. But none of these naturalistic explanations mean that the car arose without a creator or that its movements are without direction. Though atheists have no logical basis for doing science themselves, they insist that Christians are the enemies of reason, who refuse to objectively weigh the evidence.
How do we know that these dinosaurs are hundreds of millions of years old? The answer is evidence. Tons and tons of mutually supporting evidence. Science is about testing, comparing and corroborating this mass of evidence, and using it to update old theories of how things work. Evolution by natural selection is supported by mountains of evidence, while creation contradicts the evidence and is only backed by some ancient scribblings.
Dawkins pretends that the evidence speaks for itself and determines what he believes. But the reality is that, like the scientists who supported Uri Geller, he only accepts as evidence those things that confirm what he wants to believe. The evidence for God is all around us and in us, but atheists reject God before ever considering that evidence.
I'm just interested, what sort of evidence could science or the physical universe present to you that would make you think, actually, that is evidence that there's a mind behind this?
I find that a very difficult question. If I were looking in the Bible for evidence, heaven forbid, I would expect to see maybe increase in entropy is equal to Q reversible divided by temperature. And that is,
if there was literally an equation in the Bible,
equation
like
in
that.
the Bible, rather than all this wishy-washy, elastic writing that it pervades.
Right. So if there was something like that they discovered in the Bible,
then I'd think it was probably a forgery.
Well, exactly. The problem is, would it actually make you?
No.
I mean, is there anything from is there any kind of evidence in the universe that could make? I mean, if the stars lined up to spell, Peter, please believe in me, it's about time.
I put it down to madness.
Atheists begin with the assumption that any naturalistic explanation, no matter how far-fetched, is superior to one that involves Jesus being who he claimed to be.
This was again about the virgin birth, I think. Which is more likely, that the whole natural order is suspended, or that a Jewish minx should tell a lie?
Atheists argue that Jesus must have never existed. If he did exist, his miracles must have been mere legend. If there was more to them, he must have been an illusionist like Geller or Popov. He could never truly have risen from the dead, so if he was crucified, he must have only appeared to die. If he really died, the disciples must have stolen the body. The fact that the disciples suffered martyrs' deaths for insisting on Jesus' resurrection is explained away by saying that people do crazy things. Such skepticism makes all knowledge impossible, but atheists only use it to dismiss what they want to ignore. For all their claims, they are not rational, objective, or scientific. Theirs is an ideology that uses an illusion of science to deceive. This is made abundantly clear if we look at atheism's creation myth, known as Darwinism.